Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. We've got a great crowd. So we have a lot of information to cover, and we're going to try to get through it and then leave questions and answers at the end so everyone can ask what they need. So just a little bit about me. Dennis gave an intro, but I'm Professor Danny Gavin. I run a full-service digital marketing agency called Optage, and I also have been an adjunct professor at University of Houston for the past 5 years teaching digital marketing. Best way to reach a hold of me is Twitter or LinkedIn. I love music, and I'm a husband and father of 5, and here's my crew. I always love to show a picture of my family. That's our little girl in the middle. She's about 5 months old, and she's really cute, and we love her lots. She was a great surprise and addition. Special thanks before I start talking is, the content from this has come from a lot of my research, but also reading. Special thanks to foxwelldigital.com, commonthreadco.com, Facebook itself, and more to kind of gather all these insights today, so we could really discuss what's happening, and you can and take what are the action items that are necessary. Okay, so I don't know if any of you have seen, but these are the ads that Facebook recently put into the New York Times and other large newspapers. Facebook did these large spreads, and as you can see, they are pretty adamant of what's going on, right? We're standing up to Apple for small businesses everywhere. Apple is evil. There's no more free internet. So we can imagine, like, there's some crazy things going on. And you can see that the media came along and, really picked this up, right? This is a war between the two behemoths when it comes to the digital space and technology. Facebook is criticizing Apple. Facebook is urging Apples to think of what are they going to have to do. So there's a lot of craziness going on. So let's step back a little bit. So although this has started to come up as something that's more in the forefront, especially if you run a Facebook ads campaign. Facebook is providing messaging and letting you know about the Apple iOS 14 update. But really, this is something that started a couple months ago in the middle of COVID, which, we didn't really, kind of went by unnoticed to a lot of us. I mean, people who are really in the industry knew, but for a lot of us, we didn't even know about it. So what were the new policies that Apple announced? So number one, all apps must submit information about their app's data collection practices via Apple's App Store Connect. So Apple's coming along and saying, we want things to be much more transparent. Number two, App Store apps, including Facebook, must ask users for permissions to track them across third-party apps. So no longer, when I use an app, can that app take my data, but that app has to get my permission first. And Facebook and other platforms will need to use a new framework that restricts, aggregates, and delays event reporting. Now, because now apps, when you use an app on a phone, that app is going to ask you whether it has its permission to take your data. If someone comes along and opts out and says, no, I do not want you to track me. Therefore, that same data that Facebook and a lot of all other advertisers was getting, no longer are they going to get that. And therefore, Facebook and other platforms basically were pushed to create a new framework that is going to restrict the types of data that you get, aggregates, right? Puts it all together and delays the event reporting. So if we ran a campaign and saw results, those results would take a while for them to come in. It wouldn't be instantaneous. Now, originally, Facebook was not planning on using Apple's prompt or IDFA to provide stability for its partners. And here's an example of what that pop-up will look like. Hello, Palabout, or any app you're using would like permission to track you, yes or no. And it'll be interesting. We don't have polls going on, but it'd be interesting to know, like, how many of you would want to be tracked and not to be tracked. But it's just something to think about. Because on one hand, I don't want people to know about me and everything that I do. On the other hand, the more data that I give platforms like Facebook, the more personalized and targeted advertising I receive. So if I hit ask app not to track, that means that I may not get the same quality of ads that have gone in the past. And for some people, that's not an issue. So now we're going to take a deep dive and see how advertisers who use the Facebook Pixel, who are using things like Conversions API, who are using the Ads Manager, who are using Facebook ads in its completeness, or even parts of it, how are they going to be impacted? And what are the key actions that we can take? And that's the main reason. We wanted to come today and educate you on what's happening and what can you do. Okay, mobile web is also going to be impacted by this iOS 14 change. So Facebook, I know we use the term we here, but Facebook will be adopting Apple's prompt on their Facebook and Instagram. So even though they didn't want to, the pressure was there and they have to. So that means when someone logs into Facebook for the first time, they're going to have to say, yes, I want you to track me. I don't want you to track me. And just like Facebook will be other apps as well. Now, Apple has created a new protocol for web attribution. That means a new way to track people and share data of what people are doing. And it's called PCM, or private click management. However, this new protocol, this new way that Apple has set up, it significantly restricts the data that can be shared across businesses and platforms. So you can get some data, but the amount of data that I could get before, where I was able to target people really, really well, and other things like that, is very restrictive. And we're going to give two examples of where PCM, it breaks down critical advertising use cases. So sort of like day-to-day use cases of how we advertise, no longer are we going to be able to use PCM. And that is why Facebook came along and said, hey, I don't want to use PCM. And I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that I'm not here determining whether Apple is right or whether Facebook is right, but it's more just of the reality of the situation. Because Apple is coming and making, it does care about privacy in some way, right? In one perspective, but because of these changes, it is going to affect Facebook ads. So whether you like Facebook or don't, if you used it, it's going to affect it. So once again, I'm not pushing one over the other. So what would be examples of issues if you're using PCM? So number one, there will be you can no longer track conversions in the following two scenarios. In-app to mobile browser. So we think about it, most ads on your phone are within an app, right? I'm in an app and I'm reading something and there's an ad that pops up. So the problem is if I click on an ad inside a mobile app, and then that takes me to a web browser, at that point in time, the data gets lost. So if someone clicked on an ad and then went to a website and purchased something, I could not connect that ad to the purchase on the browser. And that's because there's a breakdown between app and browser. The second thing is going to be where there's an issue with PCM is cross-domain. So let's say I've got multiple domains. I've got an e-com shop in the UK. I've got an e-com shop in the US. And let's say someone in England clicks on an ad on Facebook, and that ad was set up for the US. So they click on it, it takes them to the US ad, but because they're in the UK, an automatic redirect takes place and they're taken to the UK website. During this time, also, the data gets lost. So we can no longer say someone clicked on an ad and they purchased something, connect that purchase to the original click. So these are two cases. They don't apply to everyone, but they apply to a lot of advertisers. And that is why Facebook felt to just go with Apple's PCM doesn't make sense. So what's the solution? Comes along Facebook and says, hey, we're going to create our own way of tracking, new way of tracking. And this is called aggravated event measurement, AEM. It limits the transmission of user data, but it's still going to support critical use cases like the two cases that we saw before, so that we can still track people in those two scenarios, but it's going to limit the amount of personal data that's going to be shared. Now, aggregated event measurement, it's not going to solve for all of the impacts of Apple's protocol. Advertisers are going to still lose functionality with these changes. And then you can see that specifically AEM will right away help with app to web attribution. But the second use case that we spoke about before, about cross-domain functionality of going from one website to the next, that is something that Facebook hasn't figured out yet, and they're going to be working on that in the coming months. So what will advertisers still lose even with the PCM framework? So number one, with the AEM framework. So what it means is our data is going to be restricted, aggregated, and delayed. And let's define what that means. When we say that data is going to be restricted, it means we're not going to get access to all levels of data. Knowing exactly all the different data points on someone, on an individual, we're not going to have. Number two, aggregated. We could, specifically in our ad accounts, we'd be able to break it down, look at demographics, and break it down by location. And now because of PCM, we're only going to get events at the ad or campaign level, not the user level. So to break down our data and see even at a finer level what converted and what didn't, it's going to be much harder because the data is going to be aggregated. And this may impact the way that we're going to target as well. And then finally, the data will also be delayed. Facebook reports that according to Apple, which will randomize when they report these events, it's possible that the data that we get back will only be anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. So what that means is typically right now, if I ran a Facebook ad campaign and I could see my conversions rolling through, let's say I had 50 purchases today from people who clicked on ads, I would see that in my Facebook dashboard pretty quickly, right? However, now with everything that's going on, Apple is only going to report those conversions up to 24 to 48 hours. So if you're running a campaign and you're expecting to see what did we do today? You might only see what we did today in 24 to 48 hours from now. So the space and the sphere of what we're used to is going to be very, very different. And I think that's one of the major issues here is just that, if you're starting off Facebook ads from scratch, then I think it's going to be a lot easier because that's the norm. But for people who have been using Facebook ads for such a long time, it's going to be hard to get used to. So how is AEM going to work? This new tracking system that Facebook puts together. So you can see here that this graphic will basically explain it, that we have the prompt, Apple's prompt, and the prompt will pop up and we'll say, hey, do you want to share your data? Do you not want to share your data? So for those people who opt in, there's going to be no change to the data use. That means whatever we tracked before, we're still going to have. The problem is the next people, right? The people who opt out, that's where Facebook is going to put into play their aggregated event measurement. And the data of those people will be restricted, aggregated, and there will be delays to their event attribution. So at first glance, not everything's going to change, right? People who've opted in will pretty much have the same. People who opt out, that's where we're going to have a problem. However, Facebook has taken a holistic approach to this, and all advertisers will see changes. So even though this is only affecting people who are using Apple phones and people who opt out, however, the approach that Facebook has taken is that Facebook has one platform, and they're not planning on creating one platform for Android and one for Apple. Right? They're looking at everything holistically. They feel like it would be very hard for advertisers to have one dashboard for Android situations and one dashboard for iOS situations. So therefore they decide we're going to make this change completely. Even those people who opt in, the same sort of restrictions and delays, it's going to apply to everyone in the system. And Facebook feels that due to regulation, other big platforms are moving in this direction, right? This is something that's not just going to affect Facebook, it's going to affect other ad platforms as well. And we haven't heard as much from everyone else. I mean, LinkedIn, Pinterest, TikTok, we're still trying to see from Google, what's their stance and how it's going to affect them. But Facebook claims that they were already working to do more with less granular data. So side note, let's just take compare and contrast to, let's say, Pinterest. If you advertise on Pinterest, they have not taken a holistic approach. And you can just see here in the bold black, this is from their website, that you can continue to utilize existing methodology for Android audience list targeting and mobile measurement. So for them, they've bifurcated. And they're saying, iOS people, yeah, there's a lot of things you can't do. But for Android, you can still do whatever you did in the past. Now, how are they going to deal with reporting and things like that? That's a very good question. But it's interesting to see how different platforms are tackling this in different ways. Facebook is tackling it from the holistic perspective. Okay, so Danny, thank you. You've told me all this interesting information about permissions and loss of data. So what do advertisers do? Danny, I'm a small business owner, or even if I'm work for a large corporation, what do I need to know? What do I need to do about this? So there are going to be three general areas that are affected. Number one, the business tool setup, the way that we set up our Facebook business tools. Number two, the optimization and targeting. And number three, the measurement of our advertising activities. We're going to spend the most time today on the business tool setup, but we're also going to talk about the other two as well. Okay, So the high level overview of business tool setup is that there is an 8 event limitation per domain and event configuration. And we're going to talk about exactly what those two things are. So what does it mean an 8 event limitation per domain? That means that the beauty of one of the beauties of Facebook in the past was that you could track a lot of different events. I could track people who are purchasing, people who are adding to cart, people filling out this form, that form, and I could build many, many different areas or events or custom conversions that I could track. With this new change, one is only allowed to track or optimize on 8 events. So let's say in the past you were using 16 events. You have to decide on what are the 8 events that are most important to you. And we're going to talk more about this. And why specifically 8? Well, Facebook found that this would maximize the value. And this a lot has to do with the technology that they've set up, transferring the data and passing the data from the mobile app to different things. They found that by optimizing specifically 8 channels, that would work best. Now, okay, so we say that it's 8 events per domain. What does this mean? This practically means that while an advertiser can place many pixels on a domain, they are limited to 8 events for one domain. So let's say, we're going to go into an example soon, but let's say you're a huge international website and you had a couple pixels on the website because you had 3 agencies who worked for you. Agency 1 had 1 pixel, agency 2 had another pixel, agency 3 had a different pixel. And they all had their own events and conversions. The days have changed, and bottom line is that it doesn't make a difference. Every domain only has 8 events, and all those 3 agencies kind of have to put their heads together and decide on what are the 8 things we're going to track, because we can't go past that. So what if you have more than 8 events? So the answer is you can choose your 8 events and you can swap them at any time. So let's say you have 8 things that you're tracking now. Another use case comes up where I need to track something differently. You are able to swap out the events. However, we're going to talk in a little bit that whenever you do swap out an event, it will affect any of the campaigns that are related to those events. And there will be a 3-day delay. So that means if let's say you have a purchase event as being inside your 8 events, and then you've got like a white paper event that someone downloads a white paper, you need to add that to your list of 8. When you do, all campaigns that are related to that purchase or white paper are going to be shut down for 3 days to let the data sort of re-aggregate, and then they'll launch again. So, which is pretty crazy. That means if you make any changes and you're used to advertising, suddenly now for 3 days, your ads are going to go quiet. Now, all events, not just 8, can be used for Facebook custom audiences. So what this means is that in the day-to-day targeting and running of your ads, you only have 8 events that you can choose from. But with regards to custom audiences and building these audiences, you can still build off of more than those 8. And you can use other events for other limited targeting scenarios. So once again, to build audiences, I can use other events, but specifically when I'm setting up my campaigns and targeting them, I can only select 8 events. So what do I need to practically do? So for those of you who only have 1 or 2 events, it's not as a big deal. But for those that have more, you need to select the 8 events that you want to focus on. And not only do you select these 8 events, but you have to prioritize them. We'll talk a little bit about priority, but but the way that you put it into the system is you add a prioritization scale. So you say which event is most important, which event is the least important, and you have to put it in that order. Now, this doesn't require any code updates or event updates in the Facebook platform. It's just a matter of selecting the 8 and prioritizing them. Okay, so now let's go into examples to better understand this 8 event limitation. So we spoke a little bit about this before, but in examples today, we're going to use Jasper's Market. And Jasper's Market has 1 domain with a single pixel, jaspers.com. And you can see that on jaspers.com/US. So they've got the US version of their site, and they've got a couple events. They've got their purchase event, add to cart, page view, loyalty. Now, then they've also got the international version of their website, which has its own purchase event, add to cart. And let's say in the UK. And then they also have on their website a Singapore version of their website. And that also has its own purchase event, add to cart event, page view event. So if you look here, you can see that although these are separate websites in a way, right? You've got the US version, the UK version, the Singapore version, but because it's all under the one domain, jaspers.com, bam, our rule applies. You can only select 8 events to target. So you can see in this scenario, it's kind of an issue because we've got 12 events. So what do we do? That's some of the things that businesses and agencies have to critically think about, which are the 8 that we are going to target. And campaigns that are optimizing to more than the 8 events are going to be paused and will be turned off. Okay, so that's example 1. Example 2 will be one that I kind of mentioned earlier, but let's say Jasper's Market has multiple agencies that are working on their website. They have an agency, and this is common for very, very large companies, where they have their agency who deals with the US sales, an agency that deals with the UK, Singapore, and Brazil, right? Now they only have one website, and each of these agencies have attached their own pixel to track and measure what's going on. But the problem is now, once again, each agency might have been used to tracking their own things that they wanted to. But now, because we have one domain, that means that we are only limited to 8 things that we are going to track. And if you're going to maintain that one domain structure, the agencies are going to have to fight it out or figure out a way to only track things using 8 events. Okay, now here's another example, our third example, but these are going to be websites with a global presence. Now, typically, when you have a global presence when it comes to websites, there's different ways that you can set up your websites. So that you can see the first example that we have here is where you change the, like jaspers.com or jaspers.de. So you actually change the URL and make it country specific, a country specific top level domain. Other people, the way they do it is they maintain jaspers.com, but they create subdomains for each region. So you'd have de.jaspers.com, uk.jaspers.com. And then finally, like the example we showed first, it would be like a subfolder where you have jaspers.com/uk/IE, so on and so forth. Now, for another time, we can talk about from an SEO perspective, what's the best way to set up your international presence? Should you do a top level domain? Should you do a subdomain? Or should you do a subfolder? So we're not necessarily going to focus on that today, but it's an interesting thing to think about. But when it comes to Facebook advertising, let's look now. What is the best setup? So if you think about it, the brand.region, the top level domain on the far left, that's the best setup because technically jaspers.com, jaspers.e, jaspers.co.uk, they are separate domains. Each domain will have its own 8 events. In any of the other scenarios, whether you have a subdomain or whether you have a subfolder, because it's connected all to one domain, therefore you're only going to have 8 events that you're allowed to use for all of those different domains and websites. So we could see companies that it's very, very important for them to have multiple events and they've got an international presence, switching their whole website structure because of this change. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard people who are actually going to do this, but it's something to think about. And it's pretty wild and crazy. Okay, so let's talk about solutions. So in order to choose your 8 events and prioritize them, there's something called domain verification, which means that you need to go ahead and prove that you own the domain. And inside of Facebook's Business Manager, there's an area called brand safety, and there's an area called domains. And you'll be able to go in there, enter what your domain is, and then be able to verify it either through DNS or HTML file upload to prove that you have access to that domain. And basically, why do I need to verify my domain now? Because that gives permission to the agency or the business manager to configure these 8 events. So to go in and to list what are the 8 events that I'm targeting and the priority of them, the only way that I can do that is if I have a verification of the domain. So some advertisers will be required to do this, but all are recommended to do this to avoid issues. Because you might say, oh, I only have 2 events, Danny, it's not such a big deal. But the point is that what if you have more events in the future, or you have to make a change, or the way that Facebook by default set up your events. Because what Facebook is going to be doing is by default, it's going to take your most popular events and list them as the 8 and prioritize them the way that they want. What if that's not the way that you want it? So the only way that you can go in and add your 8 events and reprioritize them is if you have set up your domain verification. And then even more so, if you have a domain with many pixels and or events, you should prioritize this action. This is something that you should do right away. Once you get off the webinar, go ahead and verify your domain, because only if you have domain verification do you have access to touch any of this. Now you can see here, here's a screenshot. This is an early screenshot of what this looks like. And you can see that we have the highest priority, we have the lowest priority, and you can select either it's an event or a custom conversion and select what you want your 8 to be, and you can prioritize. And so what does this practically mean? If, and we'll see an example of this on another slide, but if someone opts out, right? They have their app and they come along and say, I do not want to share my data. The only event that we're going to get information for is the first event, your priority number 1. The other 7, you will not get any information about that. So let's just give an example. Let's say your priority number 1 event is a purchase. And then your other events are, an email sign up, they downloaded a white paper, right? You have a lot of different events. If let's say a person opted out and say, I don't want to share my data, and then they, they click on an ad and go to the website and they don't purchase, but they subscribed to your email list, we would not see that email subscribe because it's not the highest priority event. Any events under that, we will not get any information for. So that's why you can start to understand why it's so important to figure out what's going to be my priority number 1 and how am I going to prioritize the other events as well. Another point that I want to say is that, let's say in a typical scenario, you have purchase, you have add to cart, you have view content. As people convert on the next level, we lose data on the previous. So inside of the Facebook ad platform, inside the business manager, you will only see 1 conversion per, let's say, user. Now, once again, you're not going to see the users, but it basically means that if someone has viewed a page, then if I looked in the Facebook manager, I would see a page view. But let's say that same person now went ahead and added to cart. No longer will I see a conversion for page view, but I'll see now a conversion for add to cart, and so on and so forth. So that's why the prioritization is really, really important, because Facebook is only going to report on one of the conversions that the person has done. And therefore, if you want to see those conversions inside your ads manager, it's really, really important to show which ones are the most important. So once again, if you've opted out, it will only report on the top one. People who have opted in, we can see conversions for any one of the events, but as they move up the scale, those events will disappear and we'll only see the latest conversion that they've accomplished. I know this is a lot and it's pretty technical, but I hope you were following along. So let's just break it down to another example. If someone clicks on an advertisement and then they go to the website and they view a page, then they add a product to their cart, and then they purchase, Facebook will only report one of those events. To know which one to report, you will need to prioritize. So yes, the person did all 3 actions, but Facebook is only going to report on one of those events. And therefore, to know which one they're going to report on, you have to prioritize. And the one that has the highest priority will get the event, and the other ones will not. And if someone opts out, you will only ever get the highest priority event. Now, let's reiterate what we said before. Initially, Facebook will suggest the prioritization, but you can change the order and types. Once Apple pushes the prompt. Now remember, everything that we're doing here, and I don't think I made this clear, is Apple has not pushed this change yet on to their phones. So that means if you have an iPhone and you've got the latest version of the iOS, you don't see this prompt yet. This prompt is coming in March, potentially, and that's why we need to prepare everything ahead of time. So once Apple does push the prompt, Facebook will pause campaigns that don't contain one of these 8 events. And essentially, with all these changes, we're only going to receive a partial view of campaign performance because we're only going to see one event at any time. And for people who opt out, if they don't get to the main event, we'll never see any of the events of what they've accomplished. So let's look at another example, because I think examples help iron out the point. So with our Jaspers market, you can see that today, before all of the craziness is occurring, we have unlimited events that are being returned. I can track people who have purchased. I can track when someone has added to cart. I could track when someone has viewed the men's page. With the Apple limitations, for those people who opt in and say, yes, I want to be tracked, then I can have up to 8 events returned for someone who visits a website. Once again, I'm only going to get one of them at any one point in time, but theoretically, I can track 8 events. For people who have opted out, the only event that I'll get back is my #1 prioritization, which is going to be the purchase event. So let's say they go to the website and they add it to cart, but they didn't purchase. If I check my campaigns, I will not see that. I will not see that there has been an add to cart. And you can see in this example, this is the way that we have prioritized, where purchase is the #1 thing, then add to cart, view store location, so on and so forth. Okay, when you make a change, we spoke about this before, where the fact that we come along and we choose 8 events and we prioritize them. So when you make a change, so let's say you have an advertiser who wants to change his top of 8 events. So like I said, there's going to have to be a 3-day wait when it comes to your campaigns. And this has to do for the fact that there's going to be a 24-hour attribution window that we have to wait. It's sort of like when something changes, we have to let it clear on out so that things can work based on the new setup. So there's a 24-hour attribution window, and then there's going to be a 24 to 48-hour random delay. And then at that time, advertisers can run campaigns and optimize to the new events. Now, when you make a change by adding a new event or change a prioritization, you'll have 3 days to wait, and any sooner you can have issues with reporting. So you really have to think about it. And that's why we're really pushing to set up these 8 events and prioritize them now. Because if you wake up later, right, and when Apple pushes the prompt and you come in and say, oh, okay, now it's time to set up my 8 events and prioritize them, your campaigns will actually be down for 3 days. So it's really, really important that you plan ahead of time and make sure that you have everything in place. Okay, and that's exactly the point that we tried to say. We want to prioritize now in order to avoid disruption, which means any pausing or stopping of our campaigns. So when Apple goes live, if you only use 2 to 3 events, then none of your campaigns will pause, but you will need to worry about the prioritization of the events. If you have 9 or more events or are doing value optimization, and we're going to talk more about value optimization, then you will have campaigns that will pause. And think about it practically. Let's say you have 9 events and there's the 8 events that you can use and 1 event that you can't. So let's say you have a campaign that is optimizing on that 1 event that's not in the list. So because it's not one of the 8, that campaign is going to shut off. And you will need to update your campaigns to optimize on fewer events. So if we're used to having 1 campaign optimizing on add to carts, 1 campaign optimizing on page views, 1 campaign optimizing on purchases, right? So a lot of people will have multiple campaigns optimizing on different events. So if it's part of those 8 events, then you're fine. But if it's outside of that, you are going to have to rethink how you have set up your campaigns. Now we're going to talk about value optimization. Now, value optimization is not so people who are dealing with lead generation or primarily or B2B, they don't really have to worry about this. But for people who are doing e-commerce, value optimization is important. Now, what value optimization means is there are certain types of campaigns on Facebook where I can optimize on value. And what that means is Facebook looks at the people who have purchased from you, and the people who spend more have a certain persona. People who spend less have less persona. So Facebook is going to target and find more people who spend more. And it's all based on looking at the people who purchase and the value that they purchase. So value optimization is one of the, in the past, has been one of the best ways to optimize a campaign because it finds people who spend more. So right now, when it comes to value optimization, you set it up in Ads Manager. Now in the future, it's going to be moved over to the Events Manager. If you use it today, it will be turned on by default. But if you use it infrequently, you should double check your settings. Okay, now let's talk about value optimization and why are we mentioning it? By turning on this really cool targeting feature, optimization feature, you will use a minimum of 4 events, up to 8, depending on how many value sets you use. Now, what that means is, think of a value set as a bucket. People who have purchased and then spent anywhere from $0 to $250, $250 to $500, $500 to $750, $750 to $1,000. That's 4 value buckets. And if I want to optimize and put people into different buckets, so at a minimum, this is going to take up 4 events. So remember, we have 8 events that we can choose to use and target. But if I turn on value optimization, 4 of those events are automatically going to be taken up to target the different buckets of people who are purchasing. Now, if you have more buckets and you break these down even more, you could actually fill up and use all 8 events. So this is pretty crazy. If you were used to using value optimization as a targeting tactic or optimization tactic, and you want to use it now post all these changes, it's going to take up a lot of your events that you have to use. And you're going to have less other events. So this is a huge change. So people who are using value optimization, it's really important for you to start figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to strategize about this. And the main reason that we have buckets is, once again, it's based off of a data limitation. We're no longer going to be able to get precise purchase value. So there are going to be ranges so that Facebook can group purchases together. These ranges are set up automatically, but you can go ahead and edit them. So here's just a suggestion that people are talking about when it comes to e-commerce advertisers. But the default event setup that you would do would be purchase, initiate checkout, add to cart, view content, and email sign up. And you still have room for 3 more. If you did value optimization, then your purchase would take up 4 slots at the top. Now, you might say, Danny, if my end goal is purchasing and people opt out, it's not even going to report on all these other things. Why should I even set up multiple events? And the answer is, it's not so much about optimization, it's also about reporting. Now, although we're not going to get reporting from a conversion perspective, but from a click perspective, it will help. And for people who haven't not reached your final goal, it's also important. So the bottom line is that you need to fill up these 8 events and make sure you prioritize them accordingly. All right, we spent a lot of time about events. Now we're going to move on to optimization and targeting and what's going to happen with the changes over there. So number 1, conversion window changes. There are going to be changes to how long conversions are tracked for. And this is also going to affect the sizes of our custom audiences that we're building for Facebook. Okay, so by default, the way that Facebook would measure conversions in its reporting would be a 28-day click-through and 1-day view-through. So what that means is, if someone clicks on an ad and then 27 days later they purchase something, that purchase would appear as a conversion, as a purchase within the Facebook reporting system. Or let's say someone saw an ad and then purchased a couple hours later, within 24 hours, that would also show up as a purchase. With all the changes that are going on, right now, this 28-day attribution window has disappeared. And now we are only going to be able to track people 7 days after they clicked and 1 day after they have viewed. So that means that if you had a campaign and you were advertising, and it's the type of thing that someone didn't buy right away, but it took them a good couple days or a good couple weeks, those purchases are no longer going to show up in the Facebook platform. So naturally, if you were used to seeing over time purchases increase in the platform, you are going to see a difference moving forward. The number of purchases may drop down of what you're used to seeing, because anything that happens past 7 days will no longer get attributed to your campaigns. Now, it doesn't mean that the purchases are not happening. No, the purchases could still be happening, but the problem is that they will not show up in your Facebook advertising manager. So if you say, okay, I spent $100 in this campaign, how many purchases did I get? You're going to see a lot less. Now that's in between. Once this change goes live, there will be even the 1-day view through is going to go away, and it's going to be primarily a 7-day click through. So with this, we're going to get a couple challenges, not just in the reporting and the number of conversions, but we're going to see a decrease in the audience sizes of people who have converted, right? Because think about it. Now I can set up an audience and say, I want to target all the people who have already purchased from me, or I want to target all the people who have done add to carts. So before, those audiences were built off of people who've done actions within 28 days. But now that this amount of time has been lessened, those audiences are going to shrink, and the accuracy of those audiences are going to be less. So the solution that Facebook is recommending is that although in Facebook advertising, we're really used to drilling down on very specific audiences, we're going to have to shift to broader audiences to recapture what is lost. So that very individual and specific targeting is going to go away, and we're going to have to start thinking in a broader scale. So for example, if you only use a 1-day retention, expand that to 5 to 10 days. If you're just looking at people who have added to cart, you might need to combine their audience with another audience, with people who viewed content. This will also push us to rely more on automatic placements. Maybe I can't just advertise only on iPhone or only on Android or only on specific areas, but I need to trust more in Facebook's automatic placements and allow Facebook to figure out. I need to focus on broader audiences, and I need to focus more on the true business goal. So it's crazy because it's sort of flipping things over. The fact that we could go very specific now, because the specific is not going to be as accurate, we're going to have to go and broaden in the way that we target. Another area that it's going to affect is if you relied on clean segments. So very clearly, so if you think about it, in Facebook, there's a whole push for funnel marketing. And that means that we're advertising to different people at different parts of the funnel, and then we're excluding people as they get through the funnel. So practically what that means is if someone purchased from you, do you want them to see an ad that said, 10% off? No, I only want to show the 10% off ad to people who haven't purchased. So before this switch, audiences that you built or segments that you built were very, very clean. It was the purchasers were definitely the purchasers. The people who didn't purchase were definitely people who didn't purchase. With the changes that are coming along, there is going to be more of an overlap. And that means that your segments may not be as clean. And therefore, when you think that you have a prospecting audience, an audience of people that haven't purchased from you, it's very likely that it will include people who have purchased in the past. So the lines are going to blur a lot more, and it has to change a lot of it's going to change the way that we have to think about campaigns and realize that this clear-cut demarcation of audiences is going to change. Finally, we're going to talk about measurement, where we spoke about the no 28-day attribution, but we'll talk it here about as well. The limited view through, right? And that's when someone viewed an ad and didn't click on it and then purchased later, and giving attribution back to the Facebook campaign. And the issue of no conversion event breakdowns. So as we spoke about, users will see fewer reported conversions. If I'm used to in a month seeing 100 sales in my Facebook dashboard, it's possible that this might drop down to 50. Now, once again, it doesn't mean that you're not getting another 50 conversions. It doesn't mean you're not getting 100 sales. We just won't have visibility to say that my campaign caused these additional 50 sales. Now, this concept of conversion metrics being limited only on Facebook is not necessarily true, right? This is going to affect all platforms. How it affects, let's say, the Google Ads of the world, we don't really know yet, but this is something that is going to be far-reaching, and each platform is going to deal with it in their own way. Now, this is a big one. For reported conversions, breakdowns will no longer exist. So let's say I have a campaign, and I could break it down and say, okay, in this one campaign, let's see how many purchases 18 to 24 did. How many purchases did 25 to 35? How many people purchased between 65 plus? with these changes, no longer will I be able to break down into demographics and see who purchased and what, which is crazy, right? So the visibility into our data to see at a deeper level who purchased, who didn't, who should I optimize on more, who should I not, that is going to go away, and which is just crazy. Let's say for global advertisers that were used to having one campaign that targeted multiple countries. So theoretically, in that one campaign, you would no longer be able to break it down and see, okay, how many sales did I get in the US? How many did I get in the UK? How many did I get in South Africa? So global advertisers may have to start breaking down their campaigns specifically to country. And if you think about it, if you have specific segments for age or anything like that, and you really need to see how many conversions happened, you might have to break those down into separate campaigns. But the flip side on it is what I just said a couple slides ago, is that we're trying that now with the limited amount of data, we want to try to aggregate things, right? Instead of going specific, we want to add more data together. So it's kind of like this weird dichotomy where I need to add more data together, add more targeting together. But on the other hand, I'm not able to break this down further, which is pretty crazy. So even with the data that we do get, we may not get full data. And let's talk about two specific definitions. We have modeled data and we have partial data. Modeled data means that Facebook will take delayed or missing data and model and say approximately how many conversions should there be. Partial data is going to report on what we have access to, but not all is occurring. And what does this practically mean? That in our new attribution windows, we can see that 1 day click-through. So that means if someone clicked on an ad and then purchased within 1 day, the data that we're going to get, the conversions that we're going to get in the platform will be primarily modeled, because like we said, there's going to be a 24 to 48 delay on reporting. Now, the view through 1 day and the 7 day, we're only going to get partial. And then view through of 7 days, view through of 28 days, click-throughs of 28 days, all of those attribution are going to be gone. And no longer will we be able to see that after someone clicked, 28 days later, we will not be able to see those purchases within the platform, as well as a lot of view through will go away. And this is huge. I can't stress it enough, because a lot of people, the reason why Facebook is so successful is because I was able to see people purchasing 28 days later, or people, if they viewed an ad and purchased 7 days later. So like I said, before we had all of these attribution windows, but after 28 days is going to go away, and eventually it's just going to be 7-day click. A pro tip is if you have any automated rules that are set up based on 7 days or 28 days, it's really important for you to go in and change them now, or else there will be disruption when things occur. Now, if you go into Facebook now, and one of the suggestions that I'm going to give is that ideally you want to export your data and see like how many of my conversions happened within 28 days, how many happened within 7 days or 1 day. So right now, if you go into your Facebook ad account, the 28-day data is gone. Now, it's not gone completely. If you have access to the Ad Insights API, you can still pull that data. So there's a really cool add-on for Google Sheets called Adveronics, and it's a free add-on to export data from Facebook. Using a tool like that, you can go ahead and still export your data and still see, okay, when I ran a campaign, how many conversions happened within 1 day? How many happened within 7 days? How many happened within 28 days? So you can start figuring out that once the 28 days are gone, or the 7 days are gone, what will that decrease in conversions look like? But check out Adveronics. It's really, really cool. Okay, so we've gone through so many things, and we've gone through so many different the changes that are happening. So what should I do practically? So number one, after this webinar, go in and verify your domain in Facebook Business Manager. This will allow you to choose your conversions and your events. Action 2, prepare to operate and to define the priority of these 8 events. Now, once again, we don't have that limitation yet, but it's going to be rolling out really, really soon. So make sure to start working on that. Number 3, anticipate the changes that are going to come to the attribution windows. Realize that no longer will I be able to track 28 days later, and update your automated rules. And number 4, You need to identify campaign optimization strategies that may require testing. You might be used to targeting one audience, but that audience might really not exist anymore, or different bidding strategies. Start thinking about and preparing how the world that you once knew is not there anymore, and how am I going to pivot, and what am I going to change? Now, some other things to think about are Conversions API. We're not going to talk about it. We don't have enough time, but Conversions API is another way to track conversions, not using a pixel-based system, but using the server-based. Now, this is not a solution to everything, but it is a way that you'll be able to capture more conversions. So it is something that you should look into setting up on your website. And like what we spoke about, you need to think about your attributions now, adjust what they will look like, start looking at the data and break down by device now and see, okay, how many of our conversions happen on Apple? How many happen on Android? If a lot of your sales happen on Apple, on iPhone, then you're going to see it will affect things a lot. So start looking at your historical performance and see how things have acted. Now, there's a great spreadsheet analysis tool which can help you look at all the data. Check it out at bit.ly/fb-ras-calculator, which is from Common Thread Collective, which is a really cool tool to help you manage the data. Now, with all the changes, is Facebook dead? No, Facebook is not dead. But the way that we have done Facebook is going to change. And therefore, we have to embrace that change. But what if it really affects you? What if I'm not able to be good at Facebook anymore, right? I was used to just plopping up an ad, choosing an audience, and the sales came in. And now with all these changes, it's not going to happen. So number one, we need to think more about SMS and email marketing. How can we get our existing customers to purchase more, pushing customer lifetime value? And we also have to think about demand generation, because Facebook is really demand generation, right? It's people who don't know about our products and letting them know about it. We need to think more about demand generation opportunities on Google, like YouTube ads and shopping ads. This is not a total solution, but we have to start thinking outside of the box if we were just relying on Facebook advertising. Another cool thing that I want to talk about is Google Analytics 4, which is Google Analytics. It's their latest version, which is in beta. But a lot of Google Analytics 4 is about data modeling and AI, and sort of looking at a picture when you don't have all the data points. I think tools like Google Analytics 4 and other analytics tools that are going to help fill in the missing gaps that we're going to have with our data are going to help us be better advertisers. So it's a great idea to start to set up Google Analytics 4 on your website. Don't get rid of the regular Google Analytics yet. And maybe we can have another webinar another time specifically about Google Analytics 4. So final thoughts. There's a lot of talk about what's going on, but I've heard a lot of chatter specifically on Clubhouse that, it may go back because we can't Uber target it. Maybe the people who have the better creative, the people who are creating the better ads and the stronger ads, those are going to be the people, because it might be harder to target and to track. But if I have a good product and I have a good ad, hopefully that will still win. So a lot of people say, hey, we're going back to real advertising, not just sort of this game of playing. So in the end, we will have to see. One more thing before we move to Q&A. I am launching a new academy called Odeo. And this is going to be a really cool learning and course. It's an immersive graduate level online course where you'll get the skills, knowledge, and support to launch or grow your digital marketing career. It's going to cover SEO, Google Ads, Google Analytics, Facebook ads, and more. So if you enjoyed learning today and you want to advance your career, or you want to learn more about digital marketing, then Odeo is the place for you. Just a little insight. It's going to be 11 modules of engaging high-level content. There will be a supportive community and cheering for your mentorship. There's going to be a really cool Slack group that people will be able to work together and to learn. There are challenges. We have a final project so that you'll be able to build up a portfolio so that you can actually go to an employer and say, hey, this is what I've done. So it's really, really cool. So we are launching our registration in a couple days, but for members of the Online X community, we're giving you an offer to sign up now for the pre-launch and receive a special discount specifically for the Online X community. So if this is something you're interested in taking an online digital course, which has videos, but also live trainings and all the challenges and final project, visit bit.ly/onlinex-audio-prelaunch. Go today, fill in the form, add your name and email, and you will be notified when we launch, and as well get access to the special discount. The sign up for the special offer is going to close tonight at midnight Texas time. So make sure you jump on it right away. And yeah, so that is that. So we're going to move on to thank you and questions. And I'm going to go ahead and put the, or if maybe Shoshi, if you could put the link to the bit.ly into the chat window, I think that would be good. But I think we can move on to questions now.
So Danny, there are some questions in the link. Shoshi did put your link in the chat.
Awesome.
I don't know if you want to go through the questions yourselves.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I forgot that they're in the chat window. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Let's go. So I'll start at the most recent. So we have a question here. How much will this impact LinkedIn ads? That's a very, very good question. So I actually have posted something on Twitter about it, but LinkedIn is more of a closed system and people are logged into LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is claiming that it's not going to affect as much. Specifically, if you use lead ads, they also claim that any of the ads that they're going to be showing on third-party websites, they're going to limit their ads that they're going to be showing on iOS. So there is going to be a change, but LinkedIn is coming out and saying that that change is not going to be as much. If anyone wants specific details about LinkedIn, feel free to email me or reach out to Twitter, and I can send you the exact points regarding LinkedIn and what they're claiming is going to change when it comes to LinkedIn. So another great question. Any ideas what to do if you have two different Facebook pages that run ads that resolve to the same domain? I added the code to the website, but Facebook will only verify the domain for one of the pages, so one will not be verified. So from my understanding, the verification you have to verify the domain, but that domain could still apply to multiple ad accounts. I don't think you're limited to one ad account or one page. So that's something that's interesting. I'd be happy to discuss it more offline. Okay, here's another question. Thank you for your insights, Danny. Some digital marketers are of the opinion that Instagram might be allowing more organic reach in 2021. This might still be speculative. Obviously, they have the same owners, but do you think Facebook will also be allowing more organic reach? Oh, wow, that's a great question. So because of all these changes, are Facebook or Instagram going to increase more organic reach? Ooh, I would hope so. You know, if they have the small business owners in mind, they do. But I don't know. You know, Facebook has really been tough on organic reach. And even with that, right, they want you to pay money to boost posts. So I think that would be a good gesture to the community. But my feelings are that that's sort of too positive thinking, and I don't think they will open it up. But if they do, that would be really good. Here's a comment or a point from David Brown. I honestly wouldn't want an app to track me, but I also know that it limits my user experience. For example, better data like Google Maps traffic. And I think that's a really good point. So this point, it's like two perspectives. From the advertiser's perspective, like we want as much data as possible. So we like, please opt in. But from an individual perspective, we don't really know. And I think also the point is that a lot of people, your average user, they're not necessarily educated about what does it mean to be tracked or not, right? So I think a lot of people are just going to opt out on their own, right? Not knowing that if I opt in, I'll get a better experience. So I think there's going to need to be some education coming from Facebook and from the digital marketing platforms to understand that if you do opt out, you know, you're going to miss out on certain things that you may have enjoyed in the past. All right, we have some additional questions that have come through. I work for a university, so we are a subdomain. How will this impact our use, or is the verification of the domain by the parent office going to make it more difficult to verify? So once again, that verification will happen by the parent office, and it will apply to the whole domain. So you would go ahead and the parent office would have to verify the domain. And then the trick now would be that all the different subdomains will have to agree upon 8 events and the priority of those events. So Kelsey, that's a rough one. But yeah, that's a really good example. Like universities have multiple subdomains and you're used to having your own little niche. That's going to change now. And it's really, really rough. But the good thing is we still have time. So after this webinar, sit down, pull in the people that you need to talk with and let them know these changes are coming. What can we do, right? It's not over, but we just have to get smarter and realize that it will be a change and people will adapt and people will get better and people will figure out how to still do this. But the ways that we are used to in the past will not exist further. One last question. Hi, I'm trying to start up a Facebook page, but how do I verify the page? So just to clarify once again, there's a difference between the Facebook page and the domain verification. So you can set up a Facebook page, that's not a problem. What we're talking about here is verifying the domain in your business manager. So what that means is if you have a Facebook page, if you have an ad account, you need to set up a business manager if you haven't yet. The way you set up a business manager is going to business.facebook.com. And that will allow you to create a business manager. Think of it as a master folder where you can have your Facebook page, your ad account, your pixel. It will all be in one place. In that business manager, that is where you will be able to verify your domain and will give you access to prioritizing your events.